Hello and welcome to another GiantSlayer TFT ranked meta video. Our analysts are here to go through the 11-17 meta for each stage of the game. We'll be covering each aspect of the meta, including stages, items, and compositions. The meta has shifted back towards late game champions after the nerfs to several 3-cost carries. In addition to that, reroll comps are less prominent after the B patch that nerfed champions like Aatrox and Vayne. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off, let's talk about the early game by covering component priority from the opening carousel. Items have become well balanced in the mid-set, with most of the components being comparable to one another in terms of priority. A lot of what it comes down to is player preference and playstyle. Are you the type of player that leans into one type of comp? Then you'll want to aim for a narrower range of components and another player that focuses on playing more flexibly. We can also categorize components based on the type of composition like AD or AP. There's also another category, defensive tank items, that are highly sought after because of how impactful a good frontline is in this meta. When it comes to AD items, the best component is generally Sword, as it builds into multiple AD items. Those are usually Bloodthirster, Deathblade, and Infinity Edge. Even GiantSlayer can be playable, though it's less popular than the other AD items. Glove is another common AD component since it's the other half of Infinity Edge and builds into the all-important Last Whisper. Last Whisper is often a must-have for any AD composition due to the amount of heavy armor frontlines that are in the meta, most notably Ironclad and Knights. Glove also builds into one of the best flex items, Hand of Justice. Bow has multiple uses, the most common being Rageblade, which is required for a lot of champions like Aphelios and Kayle. It also builds into Last Whisper and Runaan's, both of which are great for several champions, but the best being Nocturne. Titan's Resolve is also surprisingly good for both defensive and offensive reasons. Unfortunately, with both Riven and Yasuo falling out of priority, RFC is no longer that valuable in the meta, outside of maybe Nocturne, but even then, it's not best in slot. Sword, Glove, and Bow are certainly the highest priority for anyone wanting to play an AD comp. As for AP, Rod is alright since it builds into Jeweled Gauntlet or Archangels, but its here is generally preferred as it opens up the door for more flexible items. Items like Shojin, Hand of Justice, and Redemption. If you're looking to play AP, then yes, Archangels is likely the best item, though Blue Buff is making a small comeback due to Ziggs, Brand, and in rare cases, even Karma. And then there's the defensive items that are mainly built from Belt and Chain Vest. Folks, these components build into the best items in the meta because they're usable by any composition. We're talking about Sunfire Cape, Warmogs, Bramble Vest, Stoneplate, Redemption, and even utility items like Shroud and Banshee's Claw. Most of these items you'll want on a frontliner, and they scale well with all frontlines, whether that's Abomination, Revenant, Ironclad, or Knights. As usual, the only component with the least amount of priority is Cloak, but it is usable as Dragon's Claw is not a terrible item right now. Cloak also builds into Runaan's, a useful item for several carries, and it's a secondary component for Stoneplate and Bloodthirster. Obviously, it's not an ideal component to get, but it's not as bad as it used to be. Overall, as we said, the item meta is in a great spot. There's no wrong choice from the opening carousel since every component is useful. Now that we've covered component priority and items they build into, let's focus on the different stages of the game, beginning with Stage 1. As always, this stage plays out the same as most metas. Look for pairs to put together a strong opening board. This can be done in multiple ways, but it does depend a lot on the drops that you get from your loot orbs. For example, a player that gets gold instead of champions may be at a disadvantage compared to the players that got multiple champions. And those players may be weaker than someone that only got 1 or 2 3-cost champions. It will balance itself out eventually, but there is a lot of variance from Stage 1 PvE rounds. But the goal, as we said, is to play your strongest board. There's multiple ways to do this, such as Aatrox Callista, Dawnbringer with Gragas Frontline, Hellion with Ziggs and Spellweaver, Early Abomination, and Sentinel Skirmisher. Most 3-costs are also playable as item holders, with the 2 best being Riven and Nidalee. Yasuo is still decent, but the best items for him are less flexible, whereas Riven and Nidalee can use common AD items well. There are a lot of options for opening boards. We recommend focusing on learning what works best because a good opening board is the best way to do well going into Stage 2. Stage 2 is where players want to, ideally, begin their win streak. Win streaking is by far the best way to play the early stages of the game because not only do you earn more gold, you also save health. Saving health directly impacts how well the mid to late game will go, so making that a priority is important. Besides playing your strongest board, there are two ways to try to ensure a win streak. First, leveling. Level to 4 on either 2-1 or 2-2, or even pre-level at the end of stage 1 if you have the money to do so. Leveling increases your board size, meaning you'll do more damage and have more health than someone who's only level 3. Of course, there's more to it than that, as plenty of level 4 boards lose to level 3, but in general, a level 4 board should be stronger. The other way is slamming items, specifically defensive items like Sunfire Cape, Warmogs, or Stoneplate. A hard-to-kill frontliner buys so much time in the early rounds and increases the effective health of your board, so focusing on that is a great way to win early rounds. Making more specific items like AP or AD carry items is alright, but isn't always going to be the best. If you have a good item holder like Riven, Nidalee, or a 2-star 1-cost like Kalista, then it's fine to do. Otherwise, try to stick to defensive openers if possible. From that point, the goal is to level to 5 by 2-5 and continue playing your strongest board. Reroll comps have fallen out of favor, but if you still plan to play one, then skip leveling in the early rounds and focus on building up your economy to 50 gold by Krugs. Common reroll builds are Ziggs, Vayne, and Dawnbringer with Gragas. Aatrox and Kalista are still playable as reroll comps, but keep in mind, Aatrox was nerfed in the B patch, so it's likely not to scale as well anymore. With that, we can move into the mid-game, beginning with Stage 3, where the majority of the lobby will be leveling to 6 on 3-2. Keeping a similar level cadence to the rest of the lobby is important, especially the further into the game players go, because at higher levels you get more chances to hit 4 and 5 cost champions. So make sure you're leveling to 6 sometime between 3-1 and 3-3. The only time this isn't worth doing is when you're running a 1-cost reroll composition, or, for whatever reason, most of the lobby hasn't leveled. Level 6 is also the time where some players may need to roll. Ideally, you'd rather roll on 7, but a weak opening board going into Stage 3 is a quick way to end up in the bottom 4. Of course, for players that had a good Stage 2, they won't need to roll here, but for anyone that took a lot of losses, it is a necessity. If you do roll, look for an item holder and a frontline. The item holder can be anything, but preferably an upgraded 2 or 3 cost. Some 4-cost champions can be used here, like Jax, but others like Aphelios aren't all that great without good items. Finding a good frontline is also essential, which can be anything as long as it's either upgraded or synergizes well with your board. There are exceptions for champions that always do well even on their own, like Galio or Rel. There are also certain traits to look for at this stage, such as Abomination and early Skirmishers. Sentinels can also do well if you hit an early Lucian, but overall just piece together what you can as long as you have a champion to hold on to carry items and a good frontline. Before we move on, let's briefly talk about the Radiant round on 3-6. The best advice we can give is look for an item that fills a weakness in your comp. Lacking carry items, look for something like Radiant Deathblade or Hand of Justice. Need frontline? Radiant Stoneplate is amazing. Utility items are always great as well, such as Shroud and Banshees. Since it's 5 different items in every game, it's difficult to say what's best, but most Radiant items are viable depending on the situation and what you need for your board. Now, on to Stage 4, where the lobby will be leveling till 7 on 4-1. Level 7 in 11-17 is a bit weird because half the players are likely to roll down to hit 4-cost champions, and the other half want to greed it out and play for level 8. Both ways are viable, it just depends on your health and economy. It is worth noting that not rolling means you may lose out on valuable champions like Galio, Rel, Ivern, or a carry like Aphelios and Jax, so be sure to scout and see what players are hitting. In any case, the plan going into Stage 4 is to try to stabilize just enough so that you can hit level 8. The meta is very favored towards the late game, so picking up any champions that may help with that is ideal. Read if you can, but rolling a little bit of gold may be necessary. While we're still talking about Stage 4, let's cover a few of the meta comps that are popular right now. There's not many reroll builds floating around anymore, particularly for 3 costs, but the best is definitely Nocturne Assassin. Hitting a Nocturne 3 is a great way to place in the top 3. Besides Nocturne, the composition also has access to a great frontline with Revenants and utility from their CC, as well as the CC that Diana provides. All around, a solid composition for anyone wanting to play for a mid-game power spike. The rest of the meta is more focused on the late game, except for Jax. Jax is an in-between carry because he comes online during Stage 4 and 5, but scales poorly into the late game. Most Jax boards are defensive with 3 Skirmishers and the rest being Knights and Ironclad. Jax can be used in the late game, but it will be difficult as you need to 3-star him, otherwise you're likely playing for a top 4. Rangers are all around solid with Aphelios as the main carry and Akshan as the secondary. This composition focuses more on Revenants as the front line more so than Knights, though it can use both. Other champions to look for are Teemo to counter the AD boards, Lulu for the attack speed buff, and Gwen as a potential item holder. Rangers are likely the most consistent late game board as long as you hit Aphelios too and have a Rage Blade for him. There's not many AP boards that are doing well right now, but Abomination is the best with Vel'Koz carry. Heimerdinger is also viable, but you need to 2-star him and have Shojin plus Invoker, otherwise he won't cast enough to win rounds. Defensive items on the monstrosity are important to have because it will buy your backline a lot of time. Vel'Koz can be played outside of Abomination with Redeemed, but he does work best with Abomination. And then there's Kayle, one of the strongest late game carries if you can 2-star her. Kayle isn't the most consistent late game champion, but likely has the highest potential. All in all, the meta is quite flexible, though it emphasizes AD boards. Focus on putting together a good frontline, especially with champions like Galio and Rel, and find whatever carry works best for your items. Now we can move on to the final bit of the game, the late game. The late game is rather simple in how it plays out. Aim for level 8 during stage 5, roll to upgrade your carries in frontline, and then focus on scouting and positioning. That's really it. Positioning is by far the most important, as rolling to hit upgrades is simple. Scouting is also essential as it gives you insight into what splash traits you may need, like Ironclad or Mystic. As for level 9, well, go for it if you have the health and economy, but don't expect to hit it in most games. Instead, focus on improving your level 8 board and adding splash traits as needed, as that will be a much better use of your gold. Overall, for the late game, what's most important is improving your early and mid game. Saving health and having the economy to play for level 8 comfortably is far more important than what happens in the late game. All that really matters for the late game is scouting often and proper positioning. And that's all for today's video, folks. All in all, the meta is in a great spot with plenty of diverse compositions and playable champions to choose from. Even with the meta focus towards the late game, there's still plenty of playable comps that do well in the mid game like Jax and Nocturne. Let us know in the comments section below what you're looking forward to in patch 11.18. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.